hand it over to Jarrod.
I'm going old school, no PowerPoint for me. Okay, so as Jensen said, I work for PwC. I'm not an accountant, so just get that out there to start with. I actually am an engineer, so I studied civil engineering at Auckland University many years ago, it seems. And I started off with an engineering consultancy and have subsequently moved on from there reasonably recently. And now in what most people see as, well, why are you an engineer and an accounting company? It doesn't make any sense, but I don't do accounting. So I sit within what's called the Finance and Economics Consulting team, and we do all sorts of stuff. So I largely focus on transport and infrastructure and bits and pieces that go with transport. We look at all sorts of things from transport economics, so lots of numbers and assessing benefits of different projects, looking at ways they contribute to the economy. It's not quite as glamorous and glorious as some of the stuff that Ian was talking about, but it needs to be done. And so we look at, if a piece of transport infrastructure, maybe a rail line or changes to a bus network or some new roads, looking at maybe some cycleways, footpath upgrades, that sort of thing. We take those, work with transport engineers, urban designers, traffic engineers to understand how they sort of fit, what they're going to do, how many people they're going to get using them, and what that might mean for the economy in terms of benefits to people, benefits to companies, benefits to, I suppose, New Zealand as a whole. So that's one thing. I suppose an example on that at the moment is City Rail Link. So I assume most people here will hopefully be a little bit familiar with that. So we are undertaking the transport economics for the business case for that. So that's an important piece of work to get that to central government so they can come along and say, yep, actually this does make sense, and there's going to be a whole lot of uplift for some of the stuff, creating more work for Ian. And there's going to be benefits to Auckland in terms of agglomeration, and that goes to how the economy works. And if we get more people into the city centre, we can get more jobs, and then more jobs leads to more jobs, and it's sort of an upward spiral, if you like. And so we basically put money in terms of how that rolls in the pocket. How I got to where I am now, so as I said, engineering. I did predominantly transport modelling. So again, not really very engineering-y, it's more maths based, and worked on a whole different sort of range of projects. I did a lot of transport economics. I did some work in GIS, so we take spatial outcomes again, and we say, well, what does that mean? And we can sort of, that's a bit of a land use planning exercise at times. There is a bit of planning involved, so across my time worked with geographers, planners, mathematicians, all doing sort of similar sorts of things. So it shows that it's not really around your degree, as the others have talked about already. It's around, I guess, a bit of the way you think and having it's really around problem solving. So a lot of the transport stuff that I do and we all do is solving problems. So having a bit of an analytical mind, numbers helps from time to time, but it's not always there. And it's really around solving those problems. So someone's got a problem, it needs to be solved. If you can get together and work with, you're going to have to work with different people. You've got, council, Auckland Transport, you might have NZTA, if it's those transport sort of projects. And working with them collaboratively a lot of the time. And so a lot of it comes down to working with people and really how you can interact with people. And that goes a long way. At the end of the day, most of what we do is people-to-people business, and so working with people in a good way will get you a long way to where you want to be and what you can achieve as you develop and progress in your careers. So that's where I've sort of come from, and there's a bit of an experience around everything, and a lot of it is quite varied. And one thing I've learned is there's never a right way to do something. There can be just a slightly less wrong way to do something. Because invariably, as I think Ian picked up the same thing, you'll never get the right answer to please everyone, and it's trying to work out and get that balance between pissing this many people off versus pissing this many people off. And sometimes that's the balance that you've got to make. So what I do now in my new role, I do a lot of still transport economics, so it's that maths and that economics and finance side of things, as well as strategic advice. So I work for all sorts of different clients, and they'll have a problem. It may not be related to transport, but there's often a transport related or a people related or some sort of movement. So we do some work with freight, that type of thing. So again, you don't inherently think of that as being transport, but it is. Of course, you're transporting goods or people sometimes. Asset management is another thing that I've sort of delved into recently, and that's looking at, you might look at the whole life of cost of some of these big transport projects. So in terms of the Panmure rail station, pick up one of the points Ian raised at Amity. So Panmure rail station, big shiny bright new rail station. One of the things that we're reviewing with Auckland Transport is around what's called the consequential OPEX of that. So you go ahead, build this thing, and you may not think of it at the time, we want to make it nice and shiny and we'll have windows and glass everywhere, but of course that all needs cleaning so you can see through the glass. So that costs a lot more to constantly be cleaning glass than if you had a concrete wall. Now, a concrete wall doesn't look as pretty as glass, so you've got to weigh up those the pros and cons of using those different materials, I guess. That's just one example. One other big thing that has sort of started to rear its head in the last maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years is what's called the business case. So this is looking at, takes a problem, finds out, what's the strategic nature of that problem, and I guess it goes back to that strategic thinking and problem solving. You can identify those problems, and then you can say, well, if we solve those problems, what's the benefit of that? Just because it's a problem, maybe it's not a problem that needs solving. So we look at that, and that again goes back to that problem solving, that analytics, and then it's being able to tell a good story. So writing comes into it a lot, being able to convey sort of the thoughts, the process, some of the benefits, some of the cons, why it might be a good idea, what sort of pitfalls there might be, being able to articulate that in a way that anyone here should be able to pick up and understand, irrespective of your background. Working with people, again, is a key thing, and engaging with different stakeholders is important. And I think one thing that I've probably picked up through my career is the importance of being able to relate to people and having people in that consultation role. So if you're, communications, consultation, that sort of, if that's sort of what you're interested in, a lot of consultation is done on transport projects. So there's an area there which you might not think that sort of relates, but it's almost a completely broad field, and there's always a way in which that could be used in a transport sense, or in transport projects, or in the wider field. Breaking it down into, I suppose, some key core skills. A lot of what I do and have done is working with data and analytics. So it's having that analysis, that analytical sort of thinking, that problem solving type mindset, and that goes a long way in transport. At the end of the day, it's moving people or moving things, and if you've got 50 people, you're not going to fit them in a single car, but you might fit them in a bus. And if you've got 200 people, you can't fit them in a bus, but you might fit them in a train. So working through that sort of thought process, that's quite a simple thought process, but you get the idea. So working through those thought processes in terms of understanding that analysis and working with a broad cross-section of people. So that's been a bit of a rambly brain dump of how transport can relate to non-engineering type fields, but hopefully that's given you something else to think about.